Oh, Bob good, goblins bad. Bob control time, goblins hit with sticks. Bob make many bobs, goblins run. Bob go fast with fire bottle, goblins no match for Bob. Bob win.
Right now, Bob has all these awesome time and movement abilities, but there aren't any enemies to use them on. After adding a goblin to the scene to serve as a punching bag, the first thing I needed to do was add the UI. For the player, I wanted a heart indicator similar to the one in Breath of the Wild. The way the Breath of the Wild heart UI works is that for each point of damage you take, a quarter heart flashes white and then drains to empty using a circular wiping pattern. Recently, Unity has been putting a lot of work into their new UI system called UI Toolkit, so I decided to give it a try. The first thing I looked at doing was animating the heart circular wipe. With UI Toolkit, there's no out-of-the-box solution. You have to do things like this guy who had to write all this code just to get his heart to fill up and down. In the old UI system, you move the slider. Wanna guess which method I used? In the end, my heart setup looks like this, where there are 3 heart images, one for an empty heart, one for a full heart, and one for the flash. I just have to adjust the fill sliders and the visibility of each image in the code to animate them. The end result is something that looks pretty close to the original. The next thing I worked on was the weapon system. That means equipping weapons, making sure the attack animation played changed based on the weapon, and that rewinding reversed the animation. I also tested that the weapon equipping worked in multiplayer. It worked fine for the players, but for some reason the enemies club got scaled to be 100 times bigger than usual, which gives me an idea.
Goblins no match for Bob. The big goblin come. Big goblin fly. No legs. Big club. Bob see big goblin. Bob run fast. Big goblin chase. But Bob too fast. Bob escape. Big goblin angry. Ugh. Bob live.
Naturally, a big club needs a big goblin to wield it, so I removed the legs and scaled up another goblin model. The old movement animation doesn't quite work as well anymore, so I need to add a flying animation. I've been putting off animating for years, but now the time has finally come. As I open Animancer Pro and begin to create the flying animation for the big goblin, I know that soon I will be able to call myself a master animator. So, yeah, I just imported another animation pack into the project. Now the movement looks good, but despite having weapons, models, and animations, I still don't actually have a way to detect damage. So I added a box glider to the club to detect collisions, and animation events that will turn the box glider on or off at the right times. One potential downside of this method is that while it works at normal speeds, at very high speeds or with small objects there is the potential for hits not to be registered. If this becomes an issue later, I'll switch my methodology, but it works for now. I also made it so that screen shake and particles happen whenever you land a hit. This brings me to my first Unity rant of the year. While setting up the camera shake, I was looking through the Unity Answers site for a good way to do it with Cinemachine when I found this post, which looked just a little bit off. So I did a little digging and found this forum thread that talks about similar issues that date back all the way to 2020. The latest iteration of this is that all instances of the characters hi have been replaced with $$ anonymous $$. This makes it a major pain to read most posts or code. So in the words of Captain Pineapple, I am constantly wondering how Unity does not anonymousing in here, as synonymous is one of the most prominent first synonymous things that people stumble across when getting in contact with Unity. Synonymous page is so broken. They also managed to hide all comment replies that were made before December 2022. They are aware of the issues and have communicated them to the third-party vendor in charge of the site. But considering that they already tried to delete the site last August before backpedaling because of all the backlash, I'm not counting on it being fixed anytime soon. Going back to AI, currently the goblins just follow Bob like a moth to a flame, with no awareness of their surroundings. So I added a nav mesh to the scene that they can use to pathfind around obstacles. I also added some basic combat logic where they run up to you and start spamming attacks. One bug that happened during this process was that the goblins forgot the player's existence after the first attack. There was another bug where the goblin would stay locked in one position, allowing you to circle behind an attack without them noticing. I wanted to test a different weapon, so I spent 10 minutes adding a basic sword that has a single hit animation. I also tested multiple enemies for the first time, which is when I realized I forgot to make it so enemies couldn't hurt each other. After fixing that issue, I made it so you could die. For death animations, my initial idea was to do ragdolls, but making them sync when rewinding and in multiplayer would be a pain, so I'm sticking with the standard death animation. Dying from a melee hit will send you flying into the air. The animation consists of 3 separate sub-animations, one for the initial hit, one that loops while you are flying through the air, and another one that plays when you hit the ground. Around this time I noticed that I was having problems getting my attacks to hit goblins. To help mitigate this, I increased the size of the goblin hitbox. I also added the option to hard lock onto an enemy. While locked on, the player will strafe around the enemy at a reduced movement speed. Since you are always facing the enemy, it makes it easier to hit them. After this, I worked on getting combat working with the clones, which led to a seemingly endless onslaught of bugs. Join us! For example, here's a bug where the clone would steal your sword instead of making a new one. Or this rapid fire fart, which only happened once and I haven't been able to duplicate since. But after around 20 hours of grueling debugging, clones are working better than ever before. The number one like comment on my last video was to give clones a visual distinction, so I also spent a little bit of time working on that. While messing around with different shader effects, I seem to have unlocked Bob's hidden ability to turn into a mini sun. The final look I ended up going with is changing the color of the clone's eye. Once I had all the basic combat mechanics working, I went back to working on the big goblin. There were a few minor collision bugs I had to fix, but the first major issue I encountered was that due to the size difference between the big goblin and Bob, attacks weren't hitting because the club was swinging above Bob's head. I attempted to fix this by rotating the big goblin about the x-axis so that the swing would be angled downward, but this caused another bug where the big goblin would move and rotate in seemingly random directions. There were a few root causes of this bug, but the hardest one for me to track down was the x-axis rotation being set by some other script than my attack script. I resorted to removing random components from the goblin. Eventually I discovered it was the rigid body script that was rotating the goblin on the x-axis, even though I had the disable rotation on x-axis checkbox checked. The good news is that this is not a bug, as Alexandros from the Unity support team says, in reality, it doesn't cause any actual issues. Thankfully, locking all three axes of rotation works as expected, so now Bob will actually be hit. I gave the big goblin two other attacks, a spin attack and a ground pound. To make the spin attack, I had to modify an existing animation to have more spins. This just involved rotating around a single axis so it was within my animation abilities. The final behavior is that if you are close, there will be a ground pound. If you are at a medium distance, a swing attack will be used, and if you are far enough away, the spin attack will be used to close the distance. Right now he's basically unbeatable, so your best strategy is just to run away. I still haven't decided what the big goblin's name will be yet. Kronk? Thunder Thigh? Larry No Legs? Speaking of names, this game still doesn't have a name yet, so I asked my Discord server to help name the game. The favorite was Timeless Skies, so that's what I'm going with for now. If you want to see all the other proposed names, as well as amazing fan art, animations, binary numbers, and a bitter struggle over punctuation superiority, you should join the server if you haven't already. If not, I'll see you in the next devlog. Wait, why do I feel like I'm forgetting something? Oh, right. Before I talk about that, I have to talk a bit about networking architecture.
Ugh, network architecture boring. Bob explain. Bob make game. Many Bobs play. Server boss. Players listen. Server say what happened. But Bob no like wait. Bob want fight now. Bob think. Bob be boss. Bob control own stick, own bottom. Bob no listen to server. Bob make all Bobs boss. Bobs control own stick, own fire bottom. Bobs no wait for server. Fishnet mad. Fishnet want server boss. But Bob no care. Fishnet change soon. Bob wait. Bob save time. Bob happy. Ugh. Bob win.